Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Intuition Activation Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica, a spiritual medium and intuitive coach, and I'm so excited that you're here to join me for this intuitive development journey. Guys, I'm so excited for today's episode. I can't wait to share with you this particular episode because we have been doing this series, Life Changing Messages. And a lot of the episodes that we've been doing around this have really been people who maybe have been getting messages from their guides around what it feels like to maybe up level their business, maybe achieve their goals. But one of the subjects we haven't talked about, which is something that people often visit spiritual mediums for, is their love life. How am I going to find my partner? When am I going to meet my soulmate? What does this process look like? And I am so excited to introduce to you the beautiful Claire Brown, who I have worked with as a client over the last couple of years. We've seen each other several times in her pursuit of trying to find her soulmate, her person. And she reached out to me because she finally found her person. She found her soulmate. And a lot of the things that were said in some of our spiritual guidance sessions is what came to pass for her in the meeting of her soulmate and and her other half, if you will. And some of the things didn't happen as well. And it's really interesting for us to dive deep and explore what it can look like when you do ask your spirit guide, how and when am I going to meet my soulmate? So if you're out there and you're single and you're looking for love, this is the episode for you of how can your spirit guides play a role in helping you meet that person and what the spiritual journey of getting to that place where you energetically align with your person looks like. And Claire is such a beautiful example of someone who really does the work, who really does the spiritual work. She's a self-proclaimed astrologist, and that's part of the work that she does and puts out into the world. And so she is no stranger to diving deep and doing the work and doing the inner work, the inner child work and the healing of traumas and the growing her self-worth and self-esteem and doing all of the things. And her spirit guide just giving her the little breadcrumbs that she needed to continue going forward until she finally achieved her goal, which was meet the love of her life. And it's such a happy episode, and I'm so excited to get to share it with you. But before we do that, I do have one small announcement. I am really needing your guys' help to help grow this podcast. So I'm going to ask you if you can please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, give it a 5-star review and write a beautiful or a 5-star rating and write a beautiful review. And when you do that, take a picture of it or take a screenshot of it and send it to me either on Instagram, I am Jessica Rachel, or send it to my email, jessicarachel.snyder@gmail.com. And I am going to once a week pick out of all of the people who send them to me that week. I'm going to pick one winner at random, and I'm going to send you free access to my Meet Your Spirit Guides course. So that's my signature course. I'm going to give you free lifetime access to the course. So go ahead, write me a beautiful 5-star review, and I will announce next week's podcast who the winner is. So put yourself in the running to win the course for free. I'm so excited, and let's grow this podcast together because, guys, I need even more people to hear this message and learn how intuitive they are. So help me spread the message, spread the love. Send me a screenshot of your 5-star review, and I will put you in the running to get a free course. Doesn't hurt, right? Amazing. So I'm so excited for you guys. Without further ado, please listen for, I was going to say put your hands together for, but I don't think that that's what it is. So just enjoy this episode and I will catch you on the other side. Welcome, Claire, to the Intuition Activation Podcast. I'm so excited that you're here with me.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be such a fun session because you reached out to me. We have done several spiritual guidance sessions together over the years, and I have been loving doing this series of asking people to share what has played out since they have had their spiritual guidance session. But a lot of people really a lot of the sessions that we have described here on the podcast have been about career stuff. And I know you and I have definitely talked about career stuff, but the angle that we're going through for today is so much cooler, I think, and so much more fun, which is really how your spirit guides worked with you in terms of sharing and finding your person, getting into a serious relationship and finding sort of your one or your person. And this one's so fun for me because I think people do come to me a lot asking their spirit guides about who is their partner, who's their person. And I never really get to hear back if it ever plays out. And so when you reached out to me and said, "Hey, it actually the things that my spirit guides had said about me finding my person and how and when and all of the things actually
Mhm.
happened," that was so exciting for me because I'm like, "Oh, we have to share this on the podcast because it is such an interesting journey as to ask this particular question of a spirit guide because there's so many nuances about how you have to grow and shift and change and how then somebody else has to grow and shift and change in order
Mhm.
for the two of you to have your worlds and energies line up to actually meet each other. So that all to say, I'm just very excited to talk about all of this.
Yeah.
But let's start with just a little bit about who you are. Where are you from? Who are you? What do you do? And just yeah, let's introduce you a little bit.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm Claire. I live in the Bay Area, so near San Francisco. Let's see. I'm originally from the East Coast, but I'm very much dedicated to living in California at this point in life. And professionally, I work as a therapist and as an astrologer. And so I'm really excited about blending those practices together. And so, based on that, you can probably intuit that I'm very spiritual myself. And so, having these readings was a really important part of my own spiritual journey. And as you mentioned, my professional journey, and most importantly, my love life journey. So, I'm very excited to share more about that today.
So
Mhm.
let's dive into that a little bit. So, what sort of brought you to a point of, I think, before we even talk about what brought you to wanting to have a spiritual guidance session,
Mhm.
because you are, as you mentioned, you are a very spiritual person. And you're tech, I would say that if you're an astrologer, right, probably that spiritual growth journey or spiritual awakening journey, if you will, I'm guessing happened well before you and I ever met. And
Mhm.
so I'm curious, what was that process like for you? Were you always a spiritual individual? Was this something you were raised with? What did that sort of spiritual awakening process look like for you?
It's interesting because I definitely haven't always identified as a spiritual person, but if I look back to like childhood and stuff, I can connect some of those dots. My mom actually ended up sharing with me a couple things from when I was like 3 or 4 years old. One time I was playing by myself and she came over to talk to me, and I looked up at her and said, "Mommy, I'm forgetting what God is like."
So sweet.
And another time, I actually do remember this one. I asked my mom how we knew that dreams dreams weren't just real life. Like, how do we know the difference between dreams and what was happening when we were awake? And she was like stunned and didn't. She was like, "Well, there's a lot of people who don't really know the answer to that." And so, if I look back at some of those childhood moments, then I could say, yes, I've always been a very spiritual person. But I think as I developed, I was maybe focused on other things, and it just wasn't a big part of my identity until further along into adulthood. And I think discovering astrology was really a big doorway into that, and I'd say that kind of unlocked that path for me where I started to reconnect with that aspect of myself.
Yeah. And you know what's so beautiful and interesting about that is, well, one, first of all, I think all of us are a lot more spiritual when we're children and maybe it gets socialized out of us. So those
Mhm.
stories, I feel like when we look at children, like those are really not that uncommon, which is really beautiful. But then also it's interesting because the more that I speak to people who are really into astrology, and I wish I could, sometimes I get too cut lost in the details and I need people like you to explain it all to me. But I do find that astrology can really be a catalyst for spiritual growth for people. Like that can be the gateway drug, if you will.
Mhm, mhm.
And it opens
Yeah.
up the whole world of it for everybody.
Yes, and it makes sense to me why that was my gateway in, because when you first learn astrology, there's a lot of details, like you said, and there's just so much information, and you could study astrology forever and still not learn it all. Like, it's a wide open field, and so I do come from an academic background, and so I think being faced with something that I could be studying forever was just very exciting to me, that intellectual part of me.
Yeah.
But it is deeply spiritual, and I think actually with astrology, if you do get too caught up in the mental part of it or the intellectual part, that takes away from the embodied experience of it. And so that's something I've learned to balance out in my own study and my own personal experience with it. But looking back, it makes perfect sense to me that that was my like spiritual entry point, was something that felt heady or like more kind of intellectual, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense, and I love that, and I think it's such a good bridge, as you said, right? For
Mhm.
something, if you do have a very intellectual mind, it can be hard to step into the woo-woo spiritual side of things. So to have something that bridges the gap like that is amazing. So thank
Mhm.
goodness for astrology, right?
Yes, yes, because then it opened me up to things like talking to my spirit guides, which I think people would consider as, like, a different level of woo, but I needed to have my doorway to start on that path, and then it really made me very curious about what else was out there, so,
Yeah, I
yeah.
love it. So then let's talk about what did bring you to step into that next level of I need to go and talk to my spirit guides. I need to have a session with Jessica.
Yeah, let me think back. There certainly were some more stepping stones in between, but I think I just started on this path where I was trying to get more connected to my own intuition. I went through some pretty significant life changes right around when I turned 30, and I learned that this was during my Saturn return, which is a major astrological growth point. And so I really was on this path of wanting to connect with my authentic self, connect with my intuition. And so then I remember hearing you on a podcast, and I don't even know if I knew that talking to my spirit guides was something available to me. But at the time that I came across it, it was just like the time I needed to hear the message, and I felt open to it and ready at that point. And so it was a very easy yes for me at that moment.
Oh, that's amazing.
Mhm.
So I love it. And it can be like I usually find that I'm not like it's not the first thing on somebody's spiritual journey usually to go
Usually.
like, to get to the point where you're open to doing something like this, you probably had to have been a little further down the road. So that does make sense.
Totally, totally. And like I didn't come into it with any kind of skepticism at all. I came into it completely believing that the messages I received were genuine and authentic and meant for me to hear. And so I think that also was a big aspect of the messages being like very well received on my end. And I didn't fight it. I just let the messages be what they were. And I wasn't trying to like prove that they were right or wrong. Like, I just accepted it as what I was meant to hear in that moment. And I think that openness made a big impact in how I was able to receive what happened in the session and the follow-up sessions and how it really helped me on my path.
Oh, that's so amazing to hear. And I do want to underline that it does, first of all, it makes it so much easier for me.
Mhm. If someone's not challenging you or questioning you.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and that and also if you're energetically blocked off, it's harder for me to receive the messages, right? So if
Mhm.
you're in there as a skeptic, right? That's what I always say. I never like to, I'm not here to prove the skeptics wrong. If you want to be skeptical, be skeptical. You don't need
Mhm.
to come to me. I want you because you're here and you're open to connecting to your guides. And so it's nice when to have a client like you who then also, and it's nice when not only are you hearing and receiving the messages, but also taking action on the things that your guides are saying. That's
Mhm.
when magic happens, right? Because your guides can talk to you until you're blue in the face, but if you don't actually do anything about it, no change happens. And that's what they're there for. They're pushing you into alignment. So it's so beautiful to have someone who really listened and then magic did happen. And so let's dive into the good stuff. Let's talk
Yeah.
magic. So what I guess, and you're gonna have to jog my memory a little bit. Was it our first session? Was it a later session? How did we come about? I believe you probably just asked the flat out question, like, how do I find my person? But if
Mhm.
you want to underline a little bit more of that story of kind of what went down in those sessions and what's played out since, I would love to hear.
Totally, yeah. So, the very first thing was, like, a very reassuring message of, "Yes, he's out there. It's just a matter of time," because this was something I was really desiring very deeply, and so to just hear that I wasn't desiring it for no reason, that it was going to happen in my life, that was a message I really needed to hear, and something that I was curious about was timeline. I remember you saying, normally I try to not put a number on it, but like your guide really does want me to convey this information that it is happening soon. And at that time, the timeline that you'd mentioned was like 6 to 12 months. And I went back and looked at the dates and it ended up being like 13 months or something. So like right around that time range. But I think I needed to hear the low end could have been 6 months because I think at that time, if I had only heard a year or a little more than a year, I would have felt like that was too far away. And so it's been interesting for me to think back about like, why did I need to hear it in that specific way? And it said I needed to feel like it was could be right around the corner. And just some of the descriptions about the qualities of who this person would be just ended up really matching with my boyfriend. So
Hold on, let's talk about that for one second.
yeah.
Usually when somebody asks about and I always get I get, like, nervous when somebody asks about who's my person, right? Because so much has to be at play,
Mhm,
for you to connect with your right person because there are 2 people who need to be aligned and on their path.
mhm.
The fact that your spirit guides even gave a number is rare. They don't a specific timeline. Usually when people ask me, like, "When is he coming?" The guides will say, "He'll come when you are feeling self-worth in this area," right? Like,
Mhm,
gotten over this hurdle or this block or this whatever, and then he'll come, and they don't give a timeline to it. So the fact that they gave you a timeline is already interesting.
mhm.
Usually when they ask it when someone will ask about their loved like their person, the guides will offer it in 3 ways. They'll say, "Here's the ideal person that you need," or like, "Here's the ideal personality that's gonna come through for you," and it's maybe not what you're expecting. And they give the personality traits, then don't they also give some of the physical traits? Uh,
Yeah, so it's
and then
funny because
right? Yeah.
well, sorry, what I cut you off.
Oh,
What
no,
was
sorry, there's the 3, right? So there's the personality, the physical,
uh-huh.
and potentially how you find them.
Yeah, yeah, and so I would say the personality traits, that was the part that was, like, totally spot on. Yeah, so one of the descriptors was that, as soon as I met him, I would have this immediate rapport with him, and we would, like, how be able to talk on each other's level immediately, and that was totally true. I can, like, get into the story in a minute, but just to speak to who he is, there was something else in the reading about his mind kind of being made of this, like, higher technology, and it was so interesting because I remember you were saying, like, maybe he is a software engineer or something like that, and I had latched on to that because I live in an area where the tech world is huge, and so I was like, "Oh, he'll probably be a software engineer." He's not, but his brain totally does work that way, and so that was really interesting because he has the mind of a software engineer, even though that's not his, like, job title.
Right.
Yeah, and just, like, this quality of, like, immediately having a recognition of our souls and just clicking into place right away, and so all of that was totally accurate with who he is, and there was also something around the timing where you were saying that, like, he's finishing up a work project, and right now he's focused on his work life, but once he ties loose ends with that project, then he will be ready to turn towards romantic life. And that totally is true. He was, like, off working on this glamping project in Portugal. The project ended up falling through actually, and he traveled in Europe for a little bit. He made the most of that and then came back and then started a job in the Bay Area, and then we met after that. So that totally ended up playing out, which is crazy.
That's
Um, yeah, when I told him that, he's, "Wow, so you're the reason why my project fell through?"
of course.
There was a grander plan at play.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, and something else that was interesting because 'cause I've talked to him about this, I shared my notes with him, and so he had a really fun time kinda hearing about this and connecting with the things that were shared too, because he could really recognize himself in the description as well, but he's social and likes connecting with people, but in a different way than me, and so one thing that was discussed was that we would have, like, our time together, but I would be the one to kind of, like, draw him out into the world a bit more, and that's been totally true in terms of connecting with community. I've put a lot of energy into connecting with different community groups in my life, and now he's, like, totally part of the fabric of that, and so that's a way that we saw that prediction kind of, like, play out in our lives is that I have kind of, like, encouraged him to step outside of his own, like, inner world a bit more. Um
that's so beautiful, and it's so
Yeah.
interesting because, first of all, I do wanna underline, I thank you for saying that these are predictions that played out. I never wanna claim that I'm making prediction because but it in some way it is because you hadn't met him yet, but I think that it's almost like we were just describing the personality that he
Mhm.
is, and when you did meet, that is how it would work, right?
Yeah.
And that's just who he was, and so we were just describing maybe his energy and how what he
Mhm, mhm.
it's also so interesting because I'm curious if when the personality traits were described to you at the time, if you can remember, Did it feel, like, very different than maybe what you thought you had wanted for a partner? If you had thought of your list and then
Oh,
would it have been different where you're like, "This is not what I pictured?"
yeah, that's a great question. Let me put myself back in my shoes of that time. I think I think it was close to what I was picturing, but, like, I don't know that I had dated someone who would fit that description at that point.
Mhm.
So, it definitely was like he was gonna be different than anyone I had been with before.
Yeah, and well, I guess that's a good thing because
Yeah.
anyone before didn't seem to work out.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes. Yes, and here's why I'm asking this also is because a lot of the times when some people do get shocked when they get that description of who their partner is gonna be that they haven't met yet,
Mhm,
because there's, like, this list maybe that we have in our mind of who we think
mhm.
our ideal partner is, and there's the things that we want, and then the spirit guide comes in with, "Here's the things you actually need," and
Yep.
you may not recognize for yourself that this is what you need, but we're gonna bring it forward, and so it's almost like you have to get to a place where you even recognize that maybe that is something you need, right? Or be open
Mhm.
to receiving someone like that and seeing that we complement each other rather than checks some boxes that I think I need.
Totally. That's totally true. Yeah. And I think I was at a point in kind of my own development around my romantic life and what I was looking for that it wasn't wildly different from what I had started to identify that I thought would be qualities that would really complement me well with a partner. It was still a description that was different than anyone I dated. So it did take a level of kind of openness on my end. What I will say that's interesting is that I really pressed for a physical description and I remember you were like, "All right, we can check and see." But you were like, "Don't reject anybody if they don't match this physical description because it's just an energetic representation." And he ended up not matching the physical description. And it's so interesting looking back. I think I needed to be told a different aesthetic because I got into this energy where I was just like all the time kind of like looking for like the guy and I think I actually needed to, like, I don't know, look for, like, the wrong image first to realize that I was, like, putting too much weight on the physical description, and he caught me by surprise. So I think there was a part of me that needed to think that I knew what he would look like, but then be surprised by how it turned out, and I'm, like, so attracted to him and find him very handsome, and I like how we look as a couple and everything, so it just ended up different than I expected, but I, like, looking back, understand why I was, like, told a message of here's what he could look like, 'cause I really pressed for it. So it's interesting to look at how that factored into my journey too.
Yeah. So do you want to share like what did come through versus what he looks like?
Yeah, I think you were shown, like, an image of a man who had, like, a tall, dark, and handsome type,
Mhm.
and Zach has light features that are similar. He actually looks quite similar to me. We have,
Oh,
like, similar hair color, we both have blue eyes. And, like, you'd seen, like a masculine figure that was, like, taller than me, and Zach and I are, like, about the same height, he's, like, slightly taller than me, but, like, energetically, I feel really taken care of by him, and so I can understand why that was the energetic representation maybe of what he looked like, and I think at that moment in time, that's who I was picturing as this, like, masculine presence who would help me feel, like, protected and taken care of and loved, and so I can look back and see why that was the image that was portrayed at that time.
mhm. It's so interesting to talk about this now because I'm never, like I said, I rarely get this feedback. I think once somebody finds their person, they don't reach back out to me and tell me like so I'm happy you did this. But this is great to hear. And I'm happy for the listeners to hear this because first of all, channeling is not an exact science. And
Right.
and the listeners of this podcast always ask me, they're like, what happens if you get it wrong? Is it wrong? Like, yeah, how do you continue to do what you do? And like, how can you continue to trust yourself? And I never claim to be 100% accurate. And even with someone who does claim to be predominantly clairvoyant, look at this. I got the image totally wrong. And this is a really great example of a visual representation of energy coming through.
Mhm.
And this is what I tell people a lot. And I'm just wanting to give this example for my listeners who are trying to develop their intuition because we talk a lot about this even in our private Facebook community where we practice developing our intuition in the intuition activation community. And this is like the same thing, which is that the image is there to represent a feeling, right? And that's what you're describing here, is that the image may not be the literal interpretation or the literal thing that we're seeing. It's there to represent the feeling or the emotion behind it. And so maybe
Mhm.
for you at that time, a somebody who was tall, dark, and handsome represented the feeling of feeling protected and loved and safe. And that was the image you associated with that feeling.
Mhm.
Right? And so
Mhm.
came through looking totally different and possibly even more like yourself, which is so beautiful. You guys are gonna have really gorgeous babies when it's so good to see that. It's sort of like I can't attach the image to that, but I can definitely associate it with that feeling. And that's even the same when I channel a different color than somebody else, right? If two people are channeling different colors, it means that, let's say, the emotion that's coming through for me, let's say I'm channeling something that feels sad. Well, maybe I'm going to see blue, but maybe you associate purple with sad. So I'm going to see
Mhm.
blue and you're going to see purple, but we
Mhm.
both get sad, right? We both get that feeling from it. And so I think it's the same thing when we're asking for physical features. There's really sort of like, what's the feeling behind it? That physical representation of an emotion coming through. So I appreciate you
Totally.
bringing that forward. And I am happy that this came through. People are like, can you trust yourself ever again if you get it wrong? Yes, because
Yeah.
it meant the same thing.
Yes. It
So
meant the same thing, and the message was conveyed with kind of like a grain of salt. Like, you were like, "Don't take this to mean that you have to reject someone if they don't look like this." And so I was like, "All right, I will hold this lightly." And so I feel like it was conveyed in a way that, like, allowed me to not be overly attached to that particular description.
that's
Yeah.
fair. And I
Mhm.
do always like to give that caveat because I know I'm not 100% accurate, especially with something like that. So
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
awesome. Beautiful. So can you bring us forward to how did you meet versus how was it described that you might meet? And
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, so it's funny because, like, the meeting was a bit different than how it was described, but there's elements of it that I would say were similar, and we did have a follow-up reading maybe a month or 2 before I actually did meet him, and the message that time was just, "Keep going, it's almost here," and I was about to go on this, like, speed dating event, and I was like, "Do my guides have anything to say about this speed dating experience that I'm about to have?" And it was really like, just go and have fun, and it was that I was supposed to practice talking to new people. Um, and I think at that time, my guides were showing you this scene where I was at some kind of, like, celebration or a party of some sort, and I'm, like, introduced to him in that kind of setting. And that's not quite how it went, but I can see why my guides really wanted me to get this practice of just conversing with somebody brand new because we met in a totally random, unexpected way.
how
So, yeah, I know. I'm like, the suspense is I'm drawing
I know
a
I'm not at my seat here.
um, so there's the long version, which I will spare you from. We actually have a podcast episode about it. But yeah, but the short version is that both of us had decided to go to Outside Lands, which is a big music festival that happens in Golden Gate Park every year. Neither of us had been before. I've lived in the Bay Area for 7 years and I had never been. And we both were feeling really excited about seeing Chapel Roan perform and both had been tracking, like, her performances at these other festivals that just exploded and huge crowds, and we both felt really connected to her as an artist and really wanted to be part of her performance and have that opportunity, and so both of us had ended up going to Outside Lands by ourselves for the sole purpose of seeing this artist perform. We didn't meet in the concert, though, so both of us had our separate concert experiences, probably, like, walking circles around each other, and then we met when we were both, like, on the street about to go home. So Zach was at his motorcycle, and it's dark at this point, we can't, like, really see anything, but he's at his motorcycle, and I'm walking along the sidewalk, and all of a sudden, he just goes, "Can I share my joy with you?" And I just happened to be the person walking by, and I'm like, "Yeah, sure, of course. What's going on?" And then I, like, actually step off the sidewalk, and I look at him, and I'm like, "Oh, this guy's really cute." And he was like, "Oh, I just got back to my bike, and, like, my helmet's still here, and I'm just feeling really excited about that." And I was like, I'm really excited for you. And of course, like we both have this like high vibration, having been at this festival. We're both so fulfilled and excited. And so we just completely were matching each other's energy. We were on the same wavelength. He made this comment to the one person who was going to positively react. I think a lot of people just don't really like interacting with strangers that much, but he said that to just whoever happened to be walking by, and it was me. And so then we start talking, and I asked him, "Oh, were you at Outside Lands?" Because we're several blocks away at this point. He was like, "I was." And I said, "Who was your favorite performer of the day?" And he's Chapel Roan, obviously. I'm like, okay, we're off to a great start. We got to chatting, and a couple minutes into the conversation, I just flat out asked him for his number because at this point, I was just like, I'd had an amazing day. I was really proud of myself for going to the concert. I had thought I was gonna go with a friend, and like we had a miscommunication, so I was there alone, and that felt like a big deal to me. And so I was just kind of like riding the wave of how much the day had already been this like huge personal growth moment. And so I asked for his number, and he's, "Yeah, of course." And then he's, "Well, is your night over?" And I'm like, "Well, it's 9 p.m. on a Sunday, but it doesn't have to be done. I'm not really doing anything tonight." And he's, "Great. Where's home for you?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm all the way over the bridge in Alameda," which is like 45 minutes away from where we were at. And he's, "Me too. I just moved there 2 months ago."
Wow.
And we find out that we live a mile down the road from each other in a very specific part of the Bay Area. So, yeah, it's like a crazy story. And we talked for a few more minutes, and I just felt everything he said to me. I was like, "Who told you to say that to me?" Like he was just speaking straight to my soul. And every single thing he said, I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I could have an hour-long conversation with you about that." And so we just connected immediately, and then we like went home separately and took 15 minutes to freshen up, and then we met up at a bar in Alameda and had our first date that night. So, and the rest is history. So,
Oh my god.
yeah,
That is so cool and so beautiful. That is like a stars aligning.
literally. And like the details just get crazier with all the backstory of what had to happen for each of us to even end up at that festival that day. And then when I decided I was ready to call it a night, I'm trying to leave the venue, and I keep getting redirected. Like I keep thinking I'm at the exit, but it's actually an emergency exit. So it took me a while to actually like properly exit the venue. Meanwhile, he has like accidentally walked the wrong direction for a while, which is very out of character for him. So we're just like
Circling.
walking circles around each other until we finally are in the right place at exactly the right time. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That is so cool. And first of all, there's two things I want to share here because one, that I don't remember much from our spiritual guidance session. I don't remember much from the reading, but I do remember it saying that you were going to meet at night. So that I
Mhm.
believe.
Yes, that's true. That is
I
true. Yeah.
remember that vision clearly. It was outside and it was at night, and there
Yes.
was like I remember that part. So
Yes.
at least there was that. But here's what's more important is that there's something so beautiful about this because this is always the messaging that we hear, like from everyone when they're trying to find their person. It's like it's when you both are energetically aligned,
Yeah.
stars will align and you will show up, but you have to get to that place. You have to get to that place where you are in the same energy in order to match and meet each other. And then literally the universe will move mountains to make sure that you're in the right place at the right time.
Yes. Exactly.
Without your own effort. It's like your friend canceled on you, so you had to be alone, right? You both ended
Mhm.
up going the wrong way so that you find yourselves in the same place. Like all of those things are like literally the world bending over backwards to make sure you end up in the same time at the same place at the same time.
Mhm.
And there, but I don't want to undercut that or undervalue the fact that you had to do a lot of the personal spiritual growth work
Mhm.
to get to that vibration for all of that to align and for
Yes.
like an effortless meeting. And if I remember correctly, that is a lot of the things that your guides were saying over the course of several of our sessions was
Mhm.
what is the personal development stuff that needs to happen for the soulmate to come through, if you will.
Completely, completely true. Yes, that's spot on. And what I'll add as well is that I'd really gotten into this energy around dating where I was like seeking, like I was really looking for the person, but to the point that it was a detriment to the rest of my life. I had decided to get off of dating apps, which earlier that year, which definitely felt like the right decision for me because it was just starting to energetically not feel good anymore. But then that seeking behavior transferred over into every time I would go out to an event, I would be scanning the room and seeing, is my guy here and is he there? And I just would leave these events that weren't really about meeting a guy. Like I would leave feeling disappointed, but then I would be mad at myself. Like, why am I making everything about meeting my soulmate? And so I really had to go through a process of letting go. And the concert day, I think a previous version of myself, I would have been thinking, "Oh, am I gonna meet a guy tonight?" Looking around the crowd, and it wasn't completely absent from my mind, but I had just released it. Like, I remember I was driving over the bridge on the way there, and I said a little prayer in my mind, "Let me connect with who I'm meant to connect with," and I asked for some protection since I was gonna be there by myself, and the people I connected with at the concert ended up being this group of, like, middle-aged gay men who were huge Chappell Roan fans, and couldn't have asked for a better group of people to meet at the concert, honestly, and I was like, "Amazing, this is who I was supposed to connect with today," and really just accepted. I got to this level of wanting to just accept things for what they were, and it didn't mean that I was letting go of the desire and the dream of meeting my soulmate, but it just meant that I needed to not have it be the sole purpose of every single social interaction that I had. And literally the second that I released that is when I met him. So it works.
That's where people let it go. Let it come through. And can we also say there was probably some work around, usually, at least this is my experience with having worked with other people, but there's always some level of self-worth that maybe needs to be kind of
Mhm.
dialed up a little bit,
Yes.
would you say?
Yes.
And so, do you, and forgive me for not remembering exactly, but I do remember in some of our sessions that
Mhm.
was a message that was coming through from your guides of, this is where your work is, Claire. Like they were
Mhm.
work on the self worth, because what maybe you were attracting in the past were people who were controlling of you, or and you were accepting the, I don't know if controlling is the right word, but definitely like they were feeding into your feelings of low self worth and continuing to make you feel,
Mhm.
versus meeting your equal and your partner, like your self-worth had to be dialed up a little bit more. Can you talk a little bit about that? What did that kind of journey, that personal growth look like for you in terms of growing that and feeling more confident in yourself and using your voice and all of the things?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would say the confidence and self-worth part of the journey was major and absolutely had to be part of the experience. So after our first reading, I ended up dating someone for a couple months and it was really intense relationship, but I feel like it was the final test of this whole self-worth journey within myself because this relationship unfortunately ended up being with someone who was quite critical of me and quite judgmental, and I'm able to look back on it now and see the role that it played in my own development, and it felt like this final test from the universe to sort of, like, show me where there was still some places I needed to grow and really value myself and value what I was bringing into a partnership. And so after that, I there was one other person I dated for a couple months, and I did feel valued by him, but we just weren't the right connection for each other, and we were able to, like, amicably part ways. But I really had to, I guess, be present to these experiences that the universe was putting on my path where I was being tested to see, like, how much worthiness I was able to embody and where I still needed to pour into myself and learn to trust what my own value was and what did I bring to the table. That all had to happen in order to prepare me to meet Zach. So it was all part of the journey, and I can see that now in hindsight for sure.
Yeah, it reminds me of that, and I'm like, now we're talking about music. I'm like, that "God bless the broken road."
Yes.
But there really is, like, this feeling of, because I think that sometimes we think that we're going to connect with our spirit guide, and they're gonna give me all the answers, and then my life is just gonna be magical, and that's never really the case. It's really like your spirit guides are just gonna hold the mirror up and say, "Here's your
Mhm.
work. Here's your work. Work
Mhm.
on this, work on this, work on this." And yes, all of the things you're asking for and wanting are attainable. They're well within reach, and they're closer than you think. But here's the next few steps that you have to take in order for that to align for you. And they want you to get into alignment, and they're going to give you the dangling carrot so that you know what you're heading towards. And for
Mhm.
you, that maybe was the relationship of your person is coming, but you got to do the work. Right. And so then maybe
Totally.
some tests, right? There were some, and again, each, would you even say, based on what you just said, I'm thinking that each that relationship that happened since our first one before you met Zach were, as you said, tests, but almost testaments to where you were at, right?
Mhm.
Where your self-confidence was. And so they were reflections of that. And then when you grow
Mhm.
and change, then the relationship has to either break down or go away because you've changed and shifted. And then your energy keeps shifting until you meet your person.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
I would definitely describe it that way for sure. Yeah, and it was really important for me to be shown where I still had some work to do on myself, and it's not to say I think once you're in a relationship with someone there, you can really, even if it's your soulmate, there's still growth that can happen and you can still evolve and change. I think to be in the spot where you need to be in to meet that person that's right for you, it does require a certain level of kind of working on yourself and making sure that you really value who you are and what you bring to the table. I'll share just a little bit about Zach. I think in previous relationships, he too had felt undervalued or felt that he was in this giver role, but it wasn't necessarily reciprocated or appreciated. And so that was something that we could relate to each other on, is that both of us had felt that energy in previous relationships. And so now we appreciate each other so much and we're marking on how lucky we are to have each other and how much we appreciate what the other one does. And so it's just this beautiful balanced reciprocal relationship, and in part because both of us have been hurt by overgiving to someone who doesn't value kind of what they're like the gift that they're receiving from the other person.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful.
Mhm.
So I have to ask, is
Yeah.
is Zach a spiritual guy? Is he into this kind of
He
stuff?
is, he's super into it. Yes, that was something that I was really desiring, was a guy who was really spiritual, and so, yes, he is very much so, and that's been really cool for me to get to know or get to learn what his spiritual practices look like, and so that is very much something we share with each other, and so it's something I really wanted, and I think part of me never thought I could have it, but yeah, it's been a really, really beautiful, special part of our relationship to get to share a spiritual perspective on life, and so, yeah, it's been amazing, and yeah, he totally believes in all this stuff, and so there's none of me having to convince him of anything, like, he's totally on board, and I actually now I'm remembering this now, in our very first reading, the first thing my guides had shared about me was that I was a star seed, and I asked if he also was a star seed, and I remember he saying, "Yes, but he's from a different star or planet than you." So
Wow.
he's yeah, a different realm or something, I don't know. So he also is kind of like, I mean, we joke that he's like a part alien. So he's got some stuff where I'm like, "Am I talking to a human being or what's happening here?" But in a different way than me, so I feel like we actually complement each other really well, and there's, like, this soul connection and this deep knowing that we've been together before in a past life, so it's
Yeah.
really beautiful.
That's awesome. I actually do remember that from our very first read.
Yeah.
I remember I was like, "Oh, man, you're a starseed, and the person you're gonna call in was gonna be one too." So I definitely remember that, and it's not lost on me that the starseed became an astrologer. That is like the I don't even know if we can call that a coincidence, like, it's like it had to be.
It had to happen, yeah, totally.
Oh my goodness. Well, this has been so amazing. I have one last question for you, which is there any advice you have for the people out there listening who are still single, who are maybe still trying to find their person, who maybe have lost a little bit of hope? What can you share with them from this experience?
Totally. It's such a cliche, but, like, it really does happen when you least expect it, and I think when you can really focus on being the best version of yourself and living your life and following your passions and just doing those things that light you up and make you feel like you're excited and enjoying your life, then inevitably you will meet the right person, and, like, you don't have to change who you are, you just have to be the most sparkly expression of yourself, and then naturally you'll meet that right person who matches with you. Easier said than done, but I know I had some moments of kind of losing hope, and I talked to other women who'd had these really amazing stories around meeting their partners, and that was something that just really helped remind me that it totally could happen in a way I wasn't expecting, and it really gave me a sense of faith and hope in those times where I was just really wanting it. So, yeah.
So amazing. And I know it's so I think even I remember when I was like actively looking for my spouse at the time and everyone's saying like the cliches are true. Like when you know, you just know. And I was like, BS. Like this can't be like they're just saying that to help you feel better. And then you meet your person, you're like, oh
You're like,
no,
"They were right."
it is true. You're like, damn, I don't have anything better to share except that that is how it happens. So
Totally.
that's so funny and so beautiful. And so don't lose hope for those of you out there who are hoping still. I do want to share though, guys, for those of you listening, Claire, can you please share? Because you have your own podcast and your own business and things that can definitely be offered to this audience. And I think they would love to dive into some of your work. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what you do and your podcast and how people can find you?
Yeah, totally. I'd say the easiest way to find me is through Instagram, which is The Sky Speaks to You. And right now I offer astrology readings, and I also am a therapist. So that's only for people in California, unfortunately. But I don't know, maybe you have a lot of listeners in California. Amazing. Awesome. And then there's some links on there as well. Zach and I have a podcast called Stories I Want to Hear. Right now we're on Substack, and it's just been a fun way for us to have a creative project together. And our very first episode is our you can hear us together tell the story of meeting. And so it's been really fun to work on that with each other.
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. Oh, look at you guys. You're working together. Things. It's so amazing. And I'm so nice to see you so happy. You're just glowing and radiant.
Oh, thank you.
So much for being vulnerable and being here and showing and sharing this story with us because I think it's going to be so inspiring to so many people.
Of course, it's I feel so happy to be on this side of things where if I can share something that helps even one person, then I'm so, so happy to do so. So
I think it's going to help a lot of people. So
amazing.
much for sharing your story.
Of course.